So I think we can all agree after everything you've told us here that that was purely an act of God, that
Mm.
you're even still able to function how you are. But during that time period in your life, did you feel like you had a connection with him?
No, I didn't know that. I still didn't understand that you could have a personal relationship with God. It just was like God. God was. I knew that God was good, and I knew that God existed, but God was so far from me. I know that God. I knew that God was the creator of the universe, and so if God created all of that, how could he? How could he care for me? And like the way that my life had been going, seeing it plummet, I just didn't understand if God's so good, how could all this happen? And then following my accident, everybody would tell me, I mean, the doctors would say, we don't know how you're healing this quickly. They thought I'd be hospitalized for up to 6 months. Especially, like, they thought I was going to need skin grafts with all the burns I had on me. And they would tell me, it's a miracle. They'd tell my family, like, it's a miracle how fast she's healing. They'd come in and they'd all be like, oh, it's the girl that's healing super quick. And my spine surgeon, a neurosurgeon, he told my parents that he's done a million surgeries before, um, like risky surgeries, but that this one was nothing compared, and that he didn't understand how I was okay, how I lived and was talking, and that I was learning how to walk again. He can see through my healing God's graciousness. And at this point, it's still I accepted what they would say to me, like that God did this miracle. My parents would say, Sage, it's miraculous that you're alive. I mean, my parents, they were so involved. They were only allowed to be at the hospital 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. through those hours, and they were there 9 a.m. on the dot till 9 p.m. on the dot, and maybe like 9:10 because they would try to stay as late as they could. Um, and by the end of my hospital stay, the nurses barely had to do anything because my dad took such good care of me. He watched the nurses and see how they took care of me. And then he would do it before the nurses even came in. They'd come to do my burn care and be like, oh, Dad, you did it. Like, you did it really well, too. Um, but I think something that made me start being able to see really what God had done is the mercy that my parents gave me. I had traumatized my family. I went from being totally fine to coming home blackout drunk all the time and not remembering the nights, and I don't know what I said to them. I really harmed my family, and the fact that they were so quick to take care of me. They were so quick to show me a love that was unconditional. They're Even though I had done so much to hurt them, they didn't care. Like, they were still going to step in and care for me like I'm their daughter. And I think that that's the first thing that started opening my eyes to see that God could be more personal, knowing that God made my parents like that, and that God is allowing them to forgive me. And um, it was a really long recovery process. I'm still in recovery. I right before I left the hospital, they sent me to another part of the hospital, which is called the rehab center, and people were teaching me how to walk again. And they thought that I'd have to walk with a walker for years after. And I was in the rehab center for about a week and a half, and by the time I left, I was walking with a cane. I had a pretty bad limp still, but I could walk with only a cane, and that was amazing. It's crazy because I was learning how to walk again, but I couldn't sit up on my own because at that point, the hardware was all in my head, holding my head and my neck together, but no bones had grown over yet. They had to put bone graft over the hardware, and so because the bones hadn't had time to grow over yet, my head was only being held on by that, and all my muscles and ligaments and tendons through like the back of my head, neck to like the middle of my back had been completely shredded and ripped apart. So, and that takes a long time to heal. And even when I got home from the hospital, my parents had to get a hospital bed, and it was weird coming home because they had to really disinfect my room because I'd been in a clean hospital and I was so prone to infections with all the open wounds that I had and surgeries, that they like took everything out of my room, and all I had in there was a hospital bed and a table with all my medical supplies that I needed, like around the clock. And my parents had to be my nurse. My mom had to take time off for work. And I think that alone, my mom is the sole provider of my family, because my dad's disabled. And my mom taking so much time off when she couldn't afford it, but people stepping in for her, um, to provide rent for her house, to provide rent for her salon, to keep her business going. And then the amount of people that came and brought us, there's a meal train for us. So my family was so worried and focused on taking care of me for like months at a time that uh, people that we didn't know would cook us dinner and bring it to us every night. Someone did it. And I remember one night they left a night empty after a few weeks so that if we wanted to eat something else or leftovers or order, we could. And my mom said like she realized how much her brain wasn't working properly. Like she was so focused on me, she almost forgot to eat and almost forgot that my family needed to eat and that I needed to eat. Um, but just the amount of care and like the deep amount of care that my parents gave me was tremendous. And I was entering like a period of my life where I started going through an identity crisis because I felt like I didn't recognize myself when I looked at knowing all, like, I have a whole new body now, like my body's completely different. Knowing I have all these burns and being in the hospital for a month, coming home, I just didn't recognize myself. I thought I looked like, looking at a picture of myself from just like a few months before my accident and looking at me a couple months after my accident, now looking at it, it's the same person. Like I look the exact same, just with some injuries, But when I looked at myself, it was like I did not recognize who I was looking at. I got to a point where it's I don't want to live like that. Like this is my second chance. My life was plummeting so downhill, and I finally get a second chance. And who do I want to be? Like who was I before all that? It was like now I had to find myself. And so I started searching like self-help books and every kind of self-help book I could find. Like I remember finding one at like Five Below, and it was like super lame. but it was nothing that. Then I had so much free time once I was a little more out of having so many appointments, like maybe only having 2 physical therapy appointments a week or down to 1. I think it was mainly down to 2. I had so much free time. I'm able to do stuff now, but I'm not so able to work. I'm not so able to live a completely normal life. At that time, I just knew like I was still in so much pain from the hurt that those friendships had caused. People felt uncomfortable around me because I did have look different and had so many injuries. And even my sister, she'd come over and she kind of didn't know how to respond to me. I was offended because she would barely look at me, and I was already having this identity crisis. And my mom would say, "Saige, you're my baby, you're my daughter, you look the exact same. But it's different. It's from my mother's eyes." So from my sister, who we were not very close growing up, and this is the time in my life where we started getting closer. She wanted to come and support me and see how I was doing, but I think it was challenging.
Talk about all your physical well-being, but I think we started to touch on it, but mentally, where did that really start to put you? And did that start to, was that more so what pushed you towards God? Was mentally where it was at? Or like, I mean, even seeing all these physical things happen, that still wasn't really it. But mentally, kind of like, where did that start to shift?
Yes, it's a really good question. So after I got home from the hospital, my pain levels were so high. I was on hardcore pain medication. I was on different opioids. And as a 20-year-old on opioids, super damaging for your body and your brain. And I knew that. But even what the doctors gave me wasn't enough. They in the hospital they would give me two. I was on oxycodone, and they would give me two every like 2 hours. And when for some reason when I left the hospital, they cut it that completely in half. Even though nothing changed except I left the hospital, which was even harder because I didn't have all the support that I had. And I was figuring out how to manage sleeping in a new bed and everything. And it was really hard. I was in so much pain that I feel like I will never be able to fathom that amount of pain that I was in. Like, nothing, I can't think of anything that compares to that pain level, because at that point, like, if I'm standing up, my head is literally being held on by like the hardware and the like flesh of my skin, but no muscles or anything. And so it was excruciating, and I would cry every night, and I would tell my mom, this life is not worth living if I have to live like this. Like, we would reach out to doctors and tell them her quality of life is just depleting. Her pain levels are extreme. Like, we need some sort of like a breakthrough medication, like to get to the next pill. We need something. And because of my age, even despite looking at my medical chart and seeing what had just happened to me, they just looked at my age and were like, oh, she just wants pills, you know. And so they didn't give it to me. And it was so hopeless feeling like not even a doctor would advocate for me, and I didn't know how to in that much pain. And I remember telling my mom like that I don't want to live like this. Like, I can't live like this. And I think what's crazy about that is that there were a couple, like quite a few times that when I was in that amount of pain, that I thought about different ways that I could no longer be here, and I thought about what I could do. And I remember one specific time going in my backyard, and I had rope and I was gonna do it, and I was like, I'd never got that close before, and um, hanging everything up and being ready, and something in me just started thinking about how much my mom had done for me and how much my dad had done for me, and how much like my sister, how many people that I didn't think cared about me really cared about me, you know. And it's so weird because my mind wasn't on that kind of stuff. Like, I was really focused on myself and the pain that I was dealing with. And so I went back inside and I went to bed. And I remember that was also the time I was going through being in an identity crisis. And uh, my dad has been disabled my whole life. The amount of pain medications that I was on was nothing compared to the amount of pain medications that my dad was on at the time. And that put into perspective the amount of pain that my dad deals with, because he's complained about his pain levels my whole life. And I've heard about, you know, I know all kinds of stuff, how it makes you a different person when you're in that much pain. When you're in that much pain and something irritates you, it's a way bigger problem. And that's what I experienced too. If something would just barely irritate me now or annoy me, like, it made me livid then. I was already on my last nerve. I was already over that line, and then something happening, it was just so easy to snap. And it was so out of character for me. But my doctors couldn't help me, but the only person that could was my dad. And my dad was the only one that got me through that time. Like, he got diagnosed when he was about 20. And he had to go through it all alone. And his disability is in his neck. It's in his spinal cord. And there's just so much about that we could relate on. And I couldn't find anyone online. I spent all my time on my phone looking for someone I could relate to about my accident, someone I could relate to about the trauma that this has caused, and to just be like, yeah, like I see the pain you're in and I relate. And I couldn't find anyone. And I found one person this is where God started to stick out to me, because I found a girl on TikTok who had internal decapitation, like the same thing that I did, the same injury, a month after my accident, same age, 20 years old, but she was a quadriplegic, and she was making videos for someone to relate to. And I remember finding that and bawling my eyes out and feeling so guilty. I lived such an awful, I was so awful to people. My life didn't feel worthy, and I was mean to people, and I walked over people, and like I felt like I had no worth. It didn't make sense to me why I got to live and have a normal life and she didn't. And she seemed so sweet and so kind. And it was like this like survivor's guilt that I felt. And I remember crying to my mom about it and my dad all the time and being like, this makes no sense. Like, why, like, this isn't fair, like, why do I get to live a perfect life and she doesn't? But she was always so joyful. She was learning how to paint with her mouth, like, because she didn't have use of her arms or legs anymore. She was in a wheelchair, but she was, despite everything she'd been through, she was painting paintings for people that are in the hospital and going through something traumatic. And I just remember seeing that and being like, she doesn't feel this way. Why do I feel like so sorry for myself and look at everything that's been given to me? Even though I feel different than I was before, I'm so lucky. If I have this time right now where I'm just home, I'm lucky to have this time. Like, before, I was always on the go, I was always working, I had so much to worry about. Like, I don't have anything to worry about now. And let's take this time and use it for good. And no self-help book was giving me the answers that I wanted. Like, nothing. It was all trash. And it felt like nothing was genuine and nothing was real. And a friend from high school reconnected with me, and she was Christian. And she had cerebral palsy, and in ways we had similar femur surgeries and pelvic hip surgeries, and we were able to just really connect about it. And she was telling me about God and her relationship with God. And at the same time, my mom was using that time to pour into me too, and my dad was. And I didn't really grow up with like my dad really talking about God, he'd like pray at dinner, but to hear like my dad, God was doing a lot. And I didn't know it, but God was using people in my life to show me love that I'd never known before, that I had never felt or felt like I had experienced before. And I started getting really interested about Christianity and like about God, like the way that she would talk about God. And she was struggling with a lot too, but around that time, I was still struggling with learning how to live in a new body and being a 20-year-old, but spending my whole year of being 20 in recovery, where that's not at all what I would have wanted to do, and still figuring out like what the purpose of me living was. And I just started I just remember one night, there were so many little things, but I was listening to podcasts, like every podcast that I could on, like that'd be like an educational podcast, because it was like, oh, I have all this time, why not learn? Like, I can't go to school right now, but I can still learn something. And they weren't giving me what I wanted. Like, I don't know what I wanted. I still don't know what I wanted. But
It's cool though, you had that drive to, continue to learn and not just sit there.
I was seeking something to fill me. And I didn't know that, but nothing could fill me. And one day there's this I just looked up like Christian podcasts randomly while I was gardening, and this podcast called Amen Podcast came up. And I actually really like that podcast still, but it's a husband and wife, and they have some young kids, and they just speak the truth. That's it. And I just turned it on randomly. And the first one that I turned on was called God's Plan. It was their most recent video at the time. And it showed me that God wanted me, that God wants me to turn to him. It was literally everything that I had been struggling with, losing friendships. Why did I have to lose those friends? Like, I loved them. Why did this have to happen in this relationship? Like, why did he have to treat me like that? I felt like I hated myself for letting that happen, you know? Like, there's just, yeah.
Why did you have to get in an accident?
Yeah.
Why did that happen?
Totally. Yeah. Like, I wanted to know the purpose behind everything that had happened in my whole entire life, and nothing would tell me. And this episode, it was just speaking the truth about God and what his plan is for our lives. And his plan for our lives is for us to love him and to see his love. And I remember a couple nights after, you know, it felt really powerful and was like, whoa, like, yeah. But listening, every little thing, just God was just speaking to my heart so much. And I ended up a couple nights later having a really hard time dealing with pain and feeling like my body couldn't keep up with my brain. I wanted to keep doing stuff, but I needed to rest, and I hated that. And I just felt like I was getting to my wit's end again. And I remember falling to my floor and just bawling my eyes out and crying out to God and not knowing if he'd answer, not knowing if he was really there or really cared for me or is what people say he is. And I just was crying out, I can't do this on my own. And I just cried out to God, and I didn't know if he'd answer, but I remember as I was crying out, I was on my bedroom floor, and I remember when he saw me. There's the story in the Bible about the woman at the well and how Jesus sees her. I remember when Jesus saw me, and just that was so powerful. All of a sudden, it felt like I was seeing every single thing that I had ever done wrong in my life. In a span of a couple seconds, I just thought about everything that I've done that's horrible, and I feel free. It was like I started to see, it was like I saw all of my sin laid out in front of me. But then I saw that I don't have to live with this. That if I take up the cross, I don't have to. And it's so supernatural because I didn't open a Bible. I didn't know God's word, but I knew in that moment I could give my life to God. And I told God that I didn't want to be in control of my life anymore, that I could not be in control of my life anymore, because look at where my life had got me. I led myself down this path. And I remember waking up the next morning and feeling so different, feeling like I had been blind my whole life, and feeling like someone gave me glasses that allowed me to not be blind anymore, to see everything. And it was crazy. I felt like I saw the sky bluer, like I saw birds in the sky I'd never seen before. Like it felt like everything was so different and crazy. I felt like I was crazy. I was telling my mom about it and telling my dad about it, and they thought I was crazy, even though they believe in God. They were, I don't know what's happening, you know.
You got too much going on. Like, you know,
yeah. And I had a Bible from when I was a kid that was in my closet because I just kept too much stuff from when I was a kid. And I remember pulling it out and opening my Bible to just like the random like flip through open, you know, randomly. And I opened it to Isaiah. I have it specifically. Let me pull it up. It's Isaiah 43:2. It reads, "When you pass through the waters, I will be with you. And when you pass through the rivers, they will not sweep over you. When you walk through the fire, you will not be burned. The flames will not set you ablaze." And that was insane to read. Like,
that's the verse you flipped to?
Yeah, and just randomly, like,
oh my god.
Oh, I got chills.
It made me see that God was there. It felt like a part of my memory of my accident was missing. I knew I was in my car for 2.5 hours, but I don't know what happened during that 2.5 hours. What happened? I wanted to know. And it felt like in that moment, I knew that God was doing something. I knew that God had taken my place, and that was Jesus, that Jesus took my place on the cross, and that Jesus felt the fire that I didn't have to, that I should remember burning in my car. Like, the doctor said, yeah, even though you don't remember right now, like most people, their memory comes back within a year or two. It's been 3 years and I don't remember anything. And I don't think I will. I know that Jesus died on the cross for me, that I put him up there, that everything that I saw that I did wrong, that every sin in my life, every time I wronged someone or even wronged myself, or just everything that I did, I put Jesus up on that cross, but he still wanted to take that fire for me. And then we're reading about the 3 Hebrew boys and King Nebuchadnezzar and them being thrown into the fire, and King Nebuchadnezzar seeing a 4th man in the fire was just, I knew in my spirit that that is what Jesus did. Jesus stood in my fire for me. And it was, I don't know why, but I mean, I think it was just the Holy Spirit doing something, but I immediately thought about how my accident, there were 3 trees in my accident, that I crashed into 3 trees, and those were meant to be the fire. Like, those were meant to, like, harm me. Not like the trees were actually, gonna grow arms and hurt me, but it's like Jesus was the 4th man. It just was, yeah. And I remember getting back into things that I used to like painting, and just trying to remember things that God put in me that I like. I felt like, okay, I don't remember anything really who I was, but I know that I've always loved art. I've always loved to create stuff. And so I started painting, and everything I was painting was just for Jesus. And it sounds so weird, but I didn't want to paint anything else. But I remember painting the first thing when I was trying to relearn how to paint, and I hadn't painted for years, and I used to paint all the time. Like, I painted the 3 trees from my accident, and fire and stuff. I put that verse over it, and it was just so powerful for me to look at every day, to be reminded that I put Jesus up on the cross, that we put Jesus up on the cross. We all come to Jesus for the same reason. We all come to God for the same reason, and it's that we put him up there, yet he still chose. He saw the Father's love for us, and that's why he chose to go with it, like go with God's plan. And like, he could have done anything to get away from that, but he chose to walk through the fire for us and to experience hell for us. The life I was living, I should have died and I would have gone to hell. Like, that is what should have happened to me. Like, looking at my life and what I did and how I treated people, and I don't deserve to be living. I don't deserve this life at all. But I know that God loves me so much that he wants me to experience his life. His love gives me life. And that's when I started to see, oh my gosh, you did all these miracles in my life. Like, so many, there's super weird little intricate things within my accident too that make no sense. And I'm like, you did that. God says nothing in me is a coincidence. And I think about that all the time. There are no coincidence, or it says there's no coincidences in God. And there truly are not. Like, everything happens purposefully. And even when it's meant to harm you, just like the life I was going through was me harming myself, but also there were things that were getting in the way of me seeing the love of God, and yet God still was greater. God was so much greater because Jesus already overcame anything that was going to get in the way. And I don't deserve it at all, but that is God's unconditional love. I just started to see my parents, how did they give me mercy like that? Oh, because God's given me mercy like that. Just seeing all these good things that are in the people that I love are from God. And what a gift it is that I can experience that. I get to experience a form of God's love from the people that I love and that care about me and spent time building me up, encouraging me, and spent nights listening to me cry. And God says that he captures every tear and he bottles it up. And I'm an emotional person, so I know there's a lot of bottles up there. But it is so beautiful that, because I know that when I was on my floor crying that night, that Jesus was there with me. That it says that Jesus is the most amazing representation we can ever get of who God is, and it's such a gift that we get to know who Jesus is, because it is crazy that in so many other religions, I looked into other religions before coming to Jesus too, is that every god in another religion or person that is made to be worshipped has no experience of what we deal with, that we have to be perfect in order to get to them, and we have to gain this worth to get to them. But with Jesus, he saw how unworthy I was, yet he still chose to die and live again so that I could be seen in his eyes, that God could see me. He sees Jesus as worthy and perfect. And Jesus wept and Jesus bled. And the crazy thing about my accident too is that I had no internal bleeding. Like, that's crazy. Like, I had, with my pelvic bone, usually when your pelvic bone shatters like mine did, your pelvic bone is super sharp. So when it shatters, it's like breaking glass. Like, a bunch of little shards go everywhere. And you most of the time get internal bleeding. I had so many broken bones and I had no internal bleeding except the brain bleed that has caused me no damage except a little bit of memory problems, but.
And you can't tell me that
gosh.
that's not intentional.
Yeah.
Like, the fact that you say that, and the only internal bleeding you get is probably what's affecting your memory, so you don't remember that.
No, literally.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
No, that's actually
Don't
crazy.
remember that pain that you went through. Like, that's...
Yeah, and
oh my gosh.
for a while, I wanted to know what happened. I would dream. I would have nightmares. I guess more so nightmare than a dream, but these dreams about right after my accident, about different ways that maybe my accident happened. My brain was trying to piece together what happened, and I couldn't. I could never understand. But the fact that I still don't have any memory, it's not like I just have a guessing feeling that it's probably not going to come back. But I feel confident in God that God took that from me, that was Jesus's time on the cross for me. Like, that was his time living and dying and living again. And yeah, the fact that I didn't have internal bleeding shows me Jesus didn't just bleed a little. Jesus was torn apart. His body was ripped apart into shreds. And my body should have been ripped apart into shreds. Like, that doesn't make sense. That makes no sense that my body was still one with a couple bones broken here and there. That makes no sense. My car split in half. Like, my engine was thrown 50 feet from my car. How come my head wasn't? It doesn't, it makes no sense. And it is beautiful. And it is I never knew what love was. I thought that everything that I believed about love was what the world calls love. A feeling, this happy feeling and I guess even I just had ideas of what love could be, but it was all romantic and what the movies make it look, and just things of the world. It's fleeting, it doesn't last, and to know that no matter what I do, that God loves me, and that no matter what I do, I'm worthy in God's eyes. I'm going to mess up and I'm going to fail, and I still do, but he still loves me. He doesn't change his mind about me. And the fact that he's given me a voice that my voice could have been lost, but instead he wants me to share my testimony.
What would your advice be to someone who's curious to Christianity?
I think look at God. Try to understand who God is. We will never be able to fully understand who God is, but look at what Jesus did for us. And I think it's so easy to feel shame and guilt and just to look back at our lives with regretting something and wishing that we did something differently, and all the things that make us depressed or sad or angry or bitter. Looking at all of that, knowing that God has designed a place where we don't have to live in that, where we don't have to experience any of that. And even though we don't deserve that, all we have to do is talk to him, confess his name, and confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. And I think that it starts with reading his word. Like, God gave us his word, and it's so easy to just see it as another book on the shelf, and that's what I used to think too. But if I came here and I never talked to you guys wouldn't know who I was. Like, God gave us a way to know who he was. He gave us his word, and the word is living, and it's truth, and it's alive, and it's like the Bible says, it's sharper than any two-edged sword. And there's times where you're going to read the Bible and you're going to feel offended because you can see that you're not living that way. But you can't sit in, oh, poor me, and feeling sorry for ourselves. And that's so easy to do, and it's not wrong, but it's not bad to feel that way, but to sit in it isn't gonna change us. There's so much in me that God has changed. I was saying earlier, my whole life I was never a kid that liked to hug even my mom or dad, and I love hugging everyone. I when I was depressed and living like that, it just felt that's just the way my brain was made. Like, God must have just, if God's so good, whatever, because he made my brain depressed, and I suck at school, and just all these lies. It's not truth. And I think opening up the Bible and focusing on who God is, desiring to know who God is. Who does he say he is? What has he done for me? And what is the purpose of that? And I know that God will show you. God desires. He's not so far. He's not just this creator of the universe that created it and wants to be away from it. God is a friend and our Father, and he wants to be near to us, and he wants to know us so personally. He's not like any father on this earth. He is so much greater, and he's so perfect. And looking at him, I don't think I would have ever, I know that I would have never been able to forgive, and even like my ex-friends. But the pain and the suffering, and I was looking at it like he ruined my life. My body is destroyed. I'm living a whole different life now, and the pain that I held in my heart, the hatred that I held in my heart for him, was hurting me more than it hurt him. He didn't know that I was suffering every day because of that, and I didn't have to tell him that I was hating him. That wouldn't have done anything. But in seeing the goodness of God and what Jesus has done for me, that I didn't deserve that, it just immediately gave me the power to be able to, I looked at what he did to me, and only through God was I able to forgive that. Like, I am powerless. I don't have the power to just change that hating feeling. I could try different things. I was with self-help. I was trying to change myself, but we're powerless. As much as we build our ego up, we don't have the abilities that God does, and that God wants to share with us, which is also amazing. God wants us to be a part of his kingdom, and to take part in it is to take hold of the power that he shares with us, and the power is his love. I am now able to have forgiveness in my heart for him, and I was freed in that moment. When I was able to forgive him, I experienced freedom. I didn't have to think about it. I didn't have to sit on it. I knew that forgiveness for me looks like putting up a boundary. I'll never see him again, but I forgive him in my heart because I don't have to, even the times where things still hurt, like I still sometimes will wonder why, but it's why? Because there's sin in the world.
You can see the purpose behind it now.
Yeah,
and it's
exactly.
Just amazing to hear your testimony be a testament of God taking what the enemy uses for evil and turning it for his good. And also I wanted to say it was so beautiful to see how when you said you hadn't opened the Word yet, the Bible, but you were able to see that representation of God's love through your family, which was a testament of the gospel right in front of you. And then that ultimately was what led you to being okay, God, you met God in that.
Yeah, it was a personal encounter with Jesus, and it is crazy. But
all right, Saige, if you had any closing statement, you don't have to answer this. We can just cut it with Reggie's beautiful moment. But if you had any closing statements,
I have a verse that I want to read. Something that God showed me is that sometimes we walk away from God, and or we reject God, and we look at the bad things that happen in the world, and we don't understand how God could love us if that happened to us, or how a loving God could exist if there's hurt in the world. But that doesn't come from God, and God has created a way for us to experience joy in an abundance of it, and to experience his love, and to see through that, and to use our gifts to be able to help those situations and help those people. And something that has stuck out to me since I've been walking with God is how God says that he's our shepherd, and how sometimes with a shepherd, he'll have a bunch of sheep and one of them will wander away, but he doesn't just look the other way and not care. He sees out of 100 sheep, he sees the one that walks away, and he runs after it, and when he finally catches the sheep and brings it back home, he rejoices over it, and all of heaven rejoices over it. And that is such a beautiful testament to God's unconditional love. God chased me down. I can see God chasing me down. He didn't just do all these miracles and I didn't see it, and he was whatever, you didn't see it, and left me. He never left me. Even times that I couldn't see it, God was always there. And just in the Bible it says that God is with us. He is Emmanuel, and I have found that God is the only consistent thing in my life, that God will never change, and I thank him for being the only consistent thing in my life. But in Matthew 18:12 through 14, it says, "If a man has 100 sheep and one of them wanders away, what will he do? He will leave the 99 others on the hills and go out to search for the one that is lost. He will rejoice over it more than over the 99 that didn't wander away." And through that, he's just shown me that he's my friend. He's my father and my friend, and that he wants me, and I don't deserve him to want me. I don't deserve his love, but despite everything, he wants our love, and he wants to know us. With the sheep, he'll get the sheep that wandered away, and he wants to know us personally, and he wants to know us intimately. And even though he is all powerful and he knows everything, he wants to hear it from us. He has chosen us, and many are called, few are chosen. That's the verse I was gonna say. And I think that God calls on a lot of people, like, because everyone everyone in this world is his child that he's created, you know. But not everyone will come. But those that come, he rejoices over it. And I think that it's worth experiencing God rejoicing over us. Like, that's insane that he would do that, you know. But so powerful.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for
thank
coming
you,
on and
Saige.
sharing your testimony. That is all we have for today, guys. That is going to wrap up episode 3 of the Safe House podcast. As always, make sure to share this with anybody that you think might need some encouragement. And thank you guys so much for listening.